This is the Straight Up Fight Network. Physical 100 Season 1 was a really great show on Netflix. It takes 100 of the most buff and impressive looking Koreans and has them compete in a series of challenges against each other to try and prove and figure out what is the number one physique for physical competition. Now, I understand some people have problems with this and they say, well, you're billing it as what is the best physique, and you have like these statues of these people, but then in the end of the day, it's not which physique looks the best, it's which one's the best for competition. And ultimately, that's really what it is. It's not which one looks the best, otherwise, it would just be no point. There'd be no point in having the challenges. It would just be look at it and determine which one's the best. But it's all about for competition, for actual functionality, for stamina, for cardio, for strength. What's the best? And we had a full season of the show, and they had a winner at the end. The end of season 1 showed that it was a CrossFitter, and where the CrossFitter really had an advantage was in the never-ending stamina cardio. The CrossFitters had a very well-rounded array of skills. So where you had people from every discipline. You had jiu-jitsu fighters and judo fighters and boxers and wrestlers. You had ice climbers and park rangers. You had every type of Olympian you could imagine in season 1. You had MMA fighters, and that's really the one that speaks most to the type of content that we examine, is you had a strong representation from combat sports. Who knew there were so many successful Koreans? But I guess that they really have, like anywhere, I guess they had a strong representation in the Olympics. And you've had some really impressive, especially in season 1, you had Sexyama. You had, it's hard to remember all of these Korean names. It's really difficult. But he was a kind of the veteran presence, the wise older fighter who used his tact and his leadership to get very far in season 1. And it was just a very rewarding watch, especially when you factor in how good the sportsmanship is on this show. Physical 100 is a show where if you had it in America, you probably wouldn't get that same wholesomeness, where when someone can't complete the task, they work their hardest to finish it. And sometimes the competitors who are killing themselves in these challenges will take the extra strain and push and cheer on their own competition to try and just complete the task and say, hey, this is about you finishing this and being the best representation for yourself that you can possibly be. So to start off season 2, which is basically brand new on Netflix, you have 100 contestants. And the opening challenge in season 1, what challenge do you do for 100? So for 100 in season 1, they had a hanging challenge. It was just an infinite hang where you have 50 at a time hanging over a body of water, and when you can't hang on any longer, your endurance goes out, your arms go out, you drop into the water, and based off of time, how long you successfully were hanging, that was the position that you would get. You would get a number accorded to you. So it wasn't that if you dropped out of the hanging challenge, you were out of the competition, but they used the hanging challenge as a way to order the contestants from 1 to 100. So that was how they did it in season 1. And then once they were split up 1 to 100, the higher numbers got to choose their opponent for what they call the death match, which is a one-on-one, mano a mano. There's a ball in a cage, there's a ball in some sort of play track where there's obstacles in some of them, and some of them there's water, in some of them it's just bare bones. There's just you, another person, and a ball, and you have to it's really a medicine ball, and you just have to get onto that medicine ball by the end of the 3-minute timer. whoever's on that medicine ball, whoever has control of it, is the winner of the death match, and the other player gets eliminated. So the first season where you did the hanging challenge, the hanging was kind of, in some ways, you could look at it and you say it's an unfair challenge because the ones with the stronger, heavier physiques are definitely going to have a tougher time hanging for a long, long amount of time. So it definitely played better for the smaller contestants. But then again, in the death match, the more physical, the stronger, the bigger contestants will make up that ground. So you could have the smaller contestants picking, and they still can't pick the bigger contestants because they'll just lose in the death match in the second round. So maybe perhaps a fair way of going about it. But what ends up happening is, and this happened in season 1 and it also happened in season 2, is that there's too much pride where the higher numbers don't just go and pick the lowest numbers. They don't just pick the scrawniest women to defeat in the deathmatch. They actually pick people who are somewhat close to themselves, and a lot of them end up getting eliminated like that, where they pick people who they think is an honorable fight. Like specifically in season 2, you had an example of this where a karate fighter wanted to fight against Mr. Ippon, the professor, an Olympian who is famous for the Ippon, who's famous for the pin in his judo competitions, and he wanted to just take on this judo master. He did, and he got eliminated in doing so, but to him it was an opportunity to have a so-called fight against a hero of his who he never would have been able to fight against. So very honorable, very, very honorable, but not a good strategy in terms of winning the show and winning the 300 million won at the end of it. So in season 2, what they did, they got rid of the hanging and they substituted a manual treadmill run. So what you had, and it was very, very impressive looking, was 100 manual treadmills. They were black, so it really had like an ominous look to it. And it was dark. And each treadmill had a spotlight on it. So each of these 100 treadmills, which they were all looked brand new, state-of-the-art manual treadmills. So the treadmill only went in accordance with how fast you ran on it. You were the one making the treadmill go. So what you have is the treadmill is tracking how far of a distance you're running on a 10-minute timer. And the top people were able to go to round 2, and whoever had a lower time was not able to advance to round 2. So I believe they knocked it down from 100, and then they knocked off half of the people. They went to 50. Then they went to the final 10 for one final 7-minute round, or one final, I think it went 10 minutes, then there was a 7-minute round, and then there was a 5-minute round. So in the 10-minute round, you had to pace yourself more. In the 7-minute round, you could go a little harder, and then in the 5-minute round, it was just all-out sprint for the remaining 10 on the treadmill. But what was so impressive about it was just the sound and just the optic of watching 100 of these incredible athletes running and running and running at the same time on these manual treadmills, and the sound it was making. It was like something out of The Lion King where there's a stampede and all the animals are running at the same time. And it just makes a crazy loud sound by the sheer force of 100 top athletes running on these impressive-looking manual treadmills. It was a really cool thing to watch. And you had, of course, the prominence of MMA being displayed from Dun Young Kim, who in his UFC career was known as the Stun Gun, and he was also known as the Cicada. So he was prominently featured because he really was a pretty big, impressive-looking figure, and he was right near the front. Very clearly, they featured him here in this running challenge. And he had this crazy stride, a very, very long, wild-looking stride for such a big guy. It was very, very impressive. And you had it go from 100 down to 50, and then from 50 down to 10. And you had the top 10. Dun Young Kim actually placed in 10th. So he made it all the way to that top tier as like a 41-year-old guy. Very, very impressive. But then you had some of the guys who just looked like they were born for this type of competition. You had a guy named Byum Sak. You had a firefighter who played in season 1 and came back for season 2. And this guy looked like he was just training all out to prepare for Physical 100 season 2. He really was a jacked specimen. And you had a few others. You had an Olympian wrestler who was a small guy but really absolutely jacked, very very scary looking figure who came into play towards the end of the competition. But all of them were very gracious to one another. So the run I actually preferred to the hanging. I thought the running challenge was a great challenge optically, and also I think it was pretty fair to have the runners get selected in order from 1 to 100, because if you can't run and if you don't have stamina, you're going to have a very, very difficult time in all of these competitions where stamina is really a very big part of it. If you really think about it, running is such a basic staple of life. In any physical competition, to think that you're just going to be able to walk through it is kind of just being out to lunch a little bit. There's always going to be an element of at least running from place to place within whatever challenge you're going to be doing. Running is such a basic part of human life. It really made a lot of sense to me that they were having this running challenge. It's a challenge where the players who are just bodybuilders and who are just arm wrestlers and who are really large and clearly don't run and don't use stamina at all are just going to get completely exposed. But the running challenge is not really a challenge that's going to go too hard on the women. The women still have a chance to place ahead of all of the really buff, or at least many of the really buff guys, the guys who concentrate purely on the physical, purely on the lifting weights and don't use the stamina part. So that's actually an upper leg to the women. Maybe it's not an ultimate upper leg because there is a level that the fastest woman in the competition is not going to be able to compete with the top men. I don't believe any woman placed in the top. It was more of a, can I be the best of all the women? That was sort of how it was from the woman perspective. From the female perspective, it was, let me try to compete to the best of the female side and also beat some of the men. But it wasn't really a case where the women could actually get in the top 10. But that's okay, I suppose. I mean, it's hard to have a competition with 100 men and women and have it be fair towards the women. It's just really never going to be. And that's one of the gripes that many people have with the show is you prominently feature the women, but then there comes a point where there are challenges that the women just cannot possibly match up. And maybe you should have it be physical 100, 50 women against each other, and then 50 men against each other in totally separate rankings. And then at the end have a winning man and a winning woman. Or maybe you just have a season of women and a season of men. So either way, these are different ways that you could go about it, but the show still made for very, very interesting television. So what happened is you ordered your people from 1 to 100, and they got branded with a number on their arm. It kind of made them look like a warrior. It was very nicely featured near the top. The lower numbers were in dark lettering. The higher numbers were in a white kind of angelic lettering. And you had very similar to the first time around. You had in the first season, you had people picking matchups that weren't necessarily the smartest. They were picking people within a similar build and size to them, and they were picking challenges. And you had this sort of repetition of oh man, I really picked someone who was a lot stronger than they looked and had a much tougher time than I thought. And then you had many people going home like that. But what you have is, then you have 50 back-to-back of these sudden death matches where you're just trying to get the ball, and it's very hard to watch in the sense of there's 100 people. There's 50 of these matches, and they all go pretty similarly, where someone either gets the ball and can just run away from the other person, or someone gets the ball and just hugs onto it for dear life, and you can't remove the person from the ball. There's only so many ways these type of death matches can go. So an idea that I had for a future season of the show is maybe for the opening decision, for the opening challenge, have it be that there's a large number of people who are going to opt for an endurance running type challenge, and then have there be a smaller number of slots that will be awarded to players based on strength. And then each player can choose, do I want to go in the field endurance competition where maybe there will be 40 out of 140 spots awarded to the top competitors in the endurance competition, and then on the flip side have maybe out of 100 people only 10 spots get awarded based on some sort of strength competition. So now you have an opportunity for anyone who wants to compete on the endurance side. You can have 40 spots to go to round 2 on the endurance side, which endurance is a very central focus of any competition. You need to be able to have good endurance and cardio. But if you are someone who thinks that you'll have absolutely no shot in the endurance competition, then maybe award 10 spots. You can choose to not to forego the endurance part of the competition, and you can try to make it on sheer strength, but you're only going to have a very small window because it's only going to be 10 spots in the strength competition. So you can either take your chance at placing top 40 in endurance or take your chance in placing top 10 out of 100 in the strength competition. So what you'll end up getting is all the buffest guys, all the guys who are strictly just the meat people are going to go for the strength. So maybe you'll get 20, 30 people go for the strength, and then maybe you'll get 70 to 80% of the people go for the endurance challenge. And what you should end up with is a very good mix of really, really fit endurance, cardio, and just overall athletic people on one side, with the remaining that they would take up the 40 of the 50 spots in round to go to round 2, and then you would get the 10 remaining on the strength side, the real strong buff guys on the strength side there. So that's just an interesting little way of going about it that I think would be very interesting, where you're giving an opportunity, a risk reward. Do you believe in your cardio? You have a higher chance. There's 40 participants who are going to go through on the cardio side. Or do you really not trust your cardio at all, but you really trust your strength? Now, that's a risky maneuver because only 10 are going to get through to round 2 on the strength side. But if you don't believe in your cardio, at least you have a chance to make it on the strength side. But even the strength side could have some sort of endurance part to it, so that at least there needs to be some sort of endurance part there, because when you get to the later challenges and you have the guys who are just strictly strength and they really didn't work out in endurance and cardio at all, those guys just collapse, and it's quite embarrassing when it hits that point. There was one guy in particular this happened to later in the season in train car pushing challenge. It was very, very embarrassing. Dun Young Kim was on this guy's team, and he was trying to push him to get across the finish line. It was really quite embarrassing for that guy. It was someone who Dun Young Kim had to pick as part of his team, and he ended up picking him, and it was really a regrettable decision later on. But anyway, so you have the sudden death match, and 50 people get eliminated, and you just repetitively watch the people go again and again and again and just getting eliminated in these death matches, and it becomes sort of repetitive. Then the competition moves into the team phase. This happened in season 1. They brought it back for season 2. And it's where they didn't just say form teams, they didn't randomly form teams. So what you have is 50 people left. And what they did was they had a vote on who would you want to be on a team with. If you could pick 2 people to be on a team with, who would be the 2 athletes that you would most want to be paired with? And they used that voting not as a way of actually picking who you'd be paired with, but all of the people who got the most votes, they were moved into the team leader category. So the top 10 vote getters became the top 10 team leaders. So what you have happen is you get these 10 of the strongest guys. And of course, each one that gets selected, as they announce their names and they say, you got the most votes, Dong Young Kim, right, the UFC fighter, he was, I believe, number one. Then you had the firefighter who returned from season one for season two. He also was the overall winner of the treadmill running challenge. He was one of the team leaders. You had great rugby player Andre Jean. He was one of them. You had a guy named who was known as the bodybuilding Thanos, a guy just with an incredible rock-esque physique. And then you had a CrossFitter with a really affable nature named Amoti. And you had all of the strongest looking guys. You had the very impressive little guy who was the judo practitioner, and you also, who was the wrestler, and you had Mr. Ipan, the professor, who was the judo practitioner, probably one of the weaker in terms of pure physical strength of all of them, but a guy who is very, very bright and smart and has a lot of respect. He really earned everyone's respect, not just in the competition, but also in what he's done in his Olympic pursuit. So you had that. I think I just named probably like 7 of the 10 right there. And what you had is you have all these guys, and then they have to go and they have to pick their teams. So Dun Young Kim, he gets first pick, and he picks, do you want to pick on strength? Do you want to pick on speed? And he ends up going for strength, but more of a strength-speed combination. And they each select their teams, and basically everyone does the same strategy of trying to pick the stronger people. But then you see Mr. Ipan, the professor, kind of takes a little bit of a different strategy, and he tries to take all the judokas, all of the people in similar sort of pursuits to himself, who he thinks has this sort of warrior spirit around them, and he forms a very anti-regular team. Not your super buff-looking team, but a team that he thinks will be nimble, and he just thinks, hey, we're just going to do our thing. And there was a team like this in the first season as well, where they were kind of doubted, and then they ended up winning a couple of challenges. And the challenge in the 3rd episode or 4th episode, however they ended up splitting it up, was a maze challenge where you're in this massive maze, and there are 3 stations in the maze. There's Station 1, Station 2, and Station 3, and each station has a bin, has a sort of a massive cart, like a massive shopping cart in it, one for your team and one for the other team. And what you had to do was gather supplies, gather these heavy bags from the center of the maze, and then you have to transfer those supplies into your carts in these 3 different locations. Now, because there was a cart for each team, every time you threw one in, you were weighing down the cart to your side, and every time the other team threw some of these supplies into their cart, they were weighing down their side. And in the end, whoever weighed down the most for their carts, they would win that section. They would win 1, 2, or 3. So your goal was to win 2 out of the 3 sections, and that would boost your team to victory. Now, the rules were kind of hard to understand. It seems like there were certain zones where you were able to steal supplies from the other team or stop the other team from walking. There was bonus supplies that was very heavy that you could get into your cart to help your team have an advantage. But altogether, when you're watching 5-on-5, and all of these teams were just newly formed, it was very, very difficult watching all of these individuals running throughout this maze. You're trying to keep track of 5 people on each team, and you don't know the teams that well because they were just drafted. They were basically drafted, and then they were randomly picked to face off against a different team. And, well, it wasn't exactly random. There was a method to the madness. There was a sort of selection process, which I won't go into because it's just hard to keep track of. But you have 5 on one team, 5 on the other team. It's very hard to know who is on what team, especially as they're each running through the maze individually to 3 different sections and back and forth to the center of supplies in the middle. So kind of not a great challenge for television, where you're seeing some people being happy, some people not being happy. You see them trying to call audibles on the fly and say, "Hey, we need help at 3. No, we need help at 2. Stop going to 3. Start going to 1." And ultimately, it was just very confusing as to who was winning. You didn't know which team was red, which team was blue, and ultimately, you're just kind of going off of vibes. And when it comes to the end, you see 5 people exuberant in victory and 5 people dismayed in defeat. So it basically came down to that the teams that played the smarter strategy would win. So the smart leaders like Dun Young Kim, they went for only 2 of the 3 locations. It was really impossible to win all 3 locations. Splitting between 5 team members, you could really only hope to win 2 out of 3. And then like the Mr. Ippon, the professor, the great judo master, he eliminated right off the bat. He's like, our team is weak. We're not going to be able to go get 3. We're just going to concentrate on 2. And they loaded up their 2 carts so high that it didn't really matter what the other team did trying to concentrate on all 3. They really stood no chance. And what you saw happen here was the strategy component, really nothing to do with physicality, but the teams with the worse strategy, the teams with the lesser leaders, lost. And you saw a lot of the strong contestants get eliminated. You saw the bodybuilding Thanos get eliminated here. You saw Amoti get eliminated here. You saw the very strong wrestler get eliminated here. The small guy with the massive chest, he got eliminated in this one. And what ended up happening was half the teams get eliminated. So there were 10 teams of 5, so there's 50, and then suddenly you're down to only 25 people left. But what they did was, which they did in the previous season as well, was you had a chance to get back into the competition. So in the first season, they did, in my opinion, a much better version of it, where you had the 25 people holding their 25 torsos with a rope. So they each had a statue of themselves, and you had to now hold your statue. And this made a lot of sense because each person was holding onto their own statue, which means that it was a challenge that was even for weight and size. So how long can you essentially hold your own torso? How long can you hold this statue of yourself? And when you would drop, your statue would break. And then the 5 remaining statues got to come back into the game as sort of a wild card team to make a 6th team as the final 30 players in the challenge, in the competition. So what they did, that was how they did it in Season 1. A very smart way of doing it. The 5 who hold out the longest, they will form a team amongst themselves to go challenge. And then in Season 2, they changed it up. They sort of did a challenge where there were posts. There were wooden posts. And what you had to do was run and hug a post and get the center of the post. If you were hugged tightly towards the center of the post when the timer struck 0, then you got to advance into the competition. And then they went slowly from 10 posts to 5 posts to 2 posts to 1 post. So at the beginning, it was 25 people gunning to try and hug and get position on 10 different posts. So what you had was, there were some guys like the bodybuilding Thanos, and there was the American football player who was very noticeable because he had a prominent bun on the back of his head. And you had a few other really strong guys. You had a high school wrestler who was very strong and very difficult to move. And those posts were just dominated, and nobody could go and wrestle the guys from their position. And then you had other people who were gunning for posts, and it was more of a battle between not the strongest, but the second, third, fourth levels of strength. And you had it go to 10, and then suddenly you had only 10 people left in the competition, so they eliminated 5 posts. And now you had 10 people, 10 of the strongest gunning for 5. And you had, then it went down to 2. And what ended up happening was you had the bodybuilding Thanos was going up against the very, very strong but much, much smaller wrestler. And the smaller wrestler showed that size really does not matter that as much as we think, because this was a challenge really tailor-made for the bodybuilding Thanos to win and just hug onto the post, and anyone who tries to get him off is just going to get thrown to the side by his brute strength. But what you had was, you had the small wrestler with sheer will and determination defeating the bodybuilding Thanos and keeping control of a post. And in the finale of this get back into the game challenge, you had the the high school wrestler with the much stronger, bigger body going up against the smaller wrestler, and the smaller wrestler won. He won by sheer will and determination and refusing to be moved. So he would wedge his way in there using his smaller build, and then the high school wrestler with the bigger build would pull him off, and the smaller guy would wedge his way back in, and he would get pulled off, and he'd wedge his way back in, and eventually he was in the center position around the post when the clock struck 0. And what he got to do, which was a very polarizing twist, was it wasn't just the 5 who did the best in the challenge who moved on in the competition and got resurrected. It was the wrestler got to pick the 4 guys who he felt would form the strongest team. So he got to basically form a super team of the 5 remaining strongest people and resurrect them as a one virtually unbeatable team. So really kind of unfair, because what would have been smarter is take the 5 who did the best in the challenge, the 5 who earned it, or do some other way of do it like you did it in the first season, where you have to hold your own torso, and then the 5 who hold their own body weight the most, they get to move on in the competition, rather than one person moving on and then resurrecting a super team of the next 4 best challengers. Because all of the other teams that were remaining were picked by the draft. So you had the 10 team leaders, they went one by one and they drafted teams. So you had 10 evenly matched teams. Then you had 5 of those teams prevail in victory and 5 of those teams lose and get eliminated. And then from those 5 teams that got eliminated, you basically got the 5 strongest people to form one unbeatable team. So kind of unfair if you're asking me, and I assume that most people would agree with me. So you had the wrestler, the small buff wrestler, resurrect a team that got referred to as the Avengers, which ironically included the bodybuilding Thanos. So you had the bodybuilding Thanos along with this incredible wrestler. You had Amoti, the Mr. Perfect, just like a guy who is probably every girl's dream watching this guy. He had the bandana looking thing with the hair flopping in the back, and he had the long, slender but super strong, combined with all the endurance. The guy who could go out there and do muscle ups and hang from bars, and just really like a monkey man out there. Just an incredible, incredible athlete. And the guy with a very affable, very kind of happy nature to him. Not really the guy who you would think would be a killer in competition, but a guy who's just so naturally gifted and has everything working to his disposal in terms of the looks and the physique, and just really everything going for this guy. And also he had a cool name on top of it, Amoti. Very original, cool, very brandable sort of name. And this guy's going to be very, very famous off of this show. So you had the 3 of them all on one team, and then you had 1 or 2 other just really top-notch athletes, and they formed the super team, the Avengers. And then you moved on to, you had these 6 teams, and they went to the mine. The mine was this sort of, it looked like a mine, and this is really the theme of the entire thing. It was like carts and mining underground. That was really the theme of Physical 100 Season 2. So you had a couple of challenges built off of transporting cargo, where it wasn't the entire team working together like it was in the maze transportation of supplies challenge. Here it was, you have to pick your teammates as delegates, where you have to pick 2 to participate in one stage of this challenge, 1 to participate in the second stage. Then you had a third portion where you picked 2 people, and then you had a final solo portion where one person had to do it by themselves. So the first part of the quest was a team challenge where you had 2 teammates working together against 2 teammates, and it was since there were 6 teams left, it was 3 teams participating at once against each other, and then in round 2 it was the next 3 teams participating against each other. And as long as you were either the winner or the second place finishers in a point system, you moved on. So out of these 6 teams, only the bottom of each. They took the 6 teams, they split them into 2 groups of 3, and the third of the 3 in terms of performance in each group got eliminated. I hope that makes sense. I know it's a little hard to understand, but you take 3 groups at once. The worst of the 3 groups got eliminated, and then you take the next 3 groups of 5, and the worst of those 3 groups got eliminated, and then you went from 6 groups down to 4 groups based on this mining cart transportation challenge. So what you had in the first one was you had the challenge was pushing. You had to push. It was a 2-man challenge, or a man and a woman challenge, where you had to push a cart together to another cart, together to a third cart, push the empty cart to the ends of the train tracks, and then you had to fill up the carts with supplies. You had to end up transporting 2 tons worth of supplies all the way back to your starting point. Now, you could do that in 1 trip, you could do that in 2 trips, whatever. The strategy was up to you. But it certainly worked in the favor of the teams that were stronger, like the Avengers team, the team that featured the bodybuilding Thanos. He was able to transport quite a lot of sand back from one location to from the ends of the tracks to the beginning of the tracks. And you had to use strategy because you needed to win enough points to move up and win outright. You needed to sacrifice, in some cases, lose certain challenges so that you could definitely win first place in other challenges, and strategically give your team the best chance of succeeding. Because if you had a weaker team and you were definitely going to lose certain parts of this challenge, well, then you had to strategically set up your team to do better in other parts of the challenge to make sure that your team of 5 can advance. So there was certainly a strategic element at play here. So just to break down the 3 teams that you had competing at this point, you had the Avengers team, the virtually unbeatable team, consisting of mainly the bodybuilding Thanos. You had him representing one team, and then you had the weaker team with Mr. Ipan, the professor, and then you had a third team which was led by Andre Jean, the pretty well-rounded rugby playing athlete. And you later found out that he was basically forced to retire from his career as a rugby player a little bit early because he had a lot of injuries that he was dealing with. So a very likable figure in this Andre Jean. So you had the weak team led by the professor say, hey, we're just going to forfeit basically the first leg of this. We don't have enough strong people to get this done, so what we're going to try to do is we are just going to put 2 weak people. They put a weak man and a weak woman up there, and they could not haul the sandbags. They were totally outmatched, and it turned into a situation where the strong team completed it, then the Andre Jean team completed it second, and then you had to have, and actually a very heartwarming moment, and this is one of the best parts of the show, is the heartwarming moments that really, it's just for no reason. The contestants and the competitors had no reason to help the third team finish and complete. But they did, and there's just something nice about it. It's very hard to describe and to explain, but when you're watching Andre Jean say, hey, let's help them finish this, let's help them finish it out, it really doesn't matter, do they finish it, do they not finish it, but there's just something about it. And even the strong team, even the Avengers team, who just have this like brute force-ish looking meathead way about them, they were all nice guys too, and they all ran down there to the end, and they said, we're all going to finish this together. And it was really a heartwarming moment as they helped the weaker team complete their part of the task. And then you moved on to a 1-person challenge, doing the same cart transportation, putting the carts together and then transporting. And it was basically whoever could do it all in 1 shot would win, and whoever could take 2 shots was still better off. And if you needed to take several trips to transport all the sand, you were done, because in the amount of time that it took to go back and forth, anyone who could manage even taking a little bit extra time pushing a bigger cart, that was clearly the way to go. And that was definitely a mistake that was made when the next set of teams stepped up for this part of the challenge. So you had the weaker team, they were sort of in the mix, and what ended up happening was you went from the first part of this challenge to the second part, which was both on the ground, and then you went to the in the air part of it, which was a long course of the monkey bars. And it wasn't just standard monkey bars, it was monkey bars where you also had to use your legs. So imagine this, you're swinging across the monkey bars and your feet are free. So you're swinging your hands, you're going one bar to another bar to another bar, and then every now and then you would have to use your feet to kick and propel this big bag of cargo that was on a sliding track above you. So you would use your feet, and your feet would propel this bag moving forward, and then you yourself would move forward through the standard monkey bars. Now, what one of the teams realized, what the members of Andre Jean's team realized, was that you were better off not trying to do big kicks to move this cargo net above you. You were better off actually just as you were swinging from bar to bar with your hands, kind of just bicycle kicking your feet and just like slowly sliding along this cargo net above you. That was actually the way to do it. It was more of a continuous bicycle motion. If you could do monkey bars with your hands while doing bicycle kicks with your feet, which really just sounds like a torturous process, that sounds like a core and ab workout combined with an arms workout that no man should ever have to do. But hey, this is literally a show called Physical 100. So, you get what you bargained for if you want to win 300 million won, however much that equals to in US dollars. Doesn't really matter. I guess they're in Korea, so that's the system that they're using. So you had the Andre Jean team do a really good job, and they managed to take first place in all of those, and their team advanced. You had the Thanos team that was really strong, the Avengers team, and they advanced. And you had, unfortunately, the Professor who took on the hero role. So there was first a team version of this in the air monkey bars part of the competition, and then there was the mano a mano. It was a singular person, sort of a hero position, where the Professor felt like he needed to represent his team and take the burden, and he just didn't have the strength to finish it off. He was on his way back to finish it out, and he fell once, and then he tried again, and he fell again, and it was just too much. The toll was too great. And unfortunately, you come to a point as an athlete where you're not the same guy that you were when you were younger. It's a really unfortunate part of life where you realize, hey, I'm not the man that I used to be. Unfortunately, father time comes for everybody, and the version of you when you were in your 20s and 30s is always going to be stronger than the version of you as you hit your 40s and as you were literally a professional athlete. You were a professional athlete at the top of your physical condition. And then now, unfortunately, you can't swing across something that you probably could have done in your sleep when you were a little bit younger. And unfortunately, the Professor's team went home. Then we had the second slew of teams. We had the second group of three going in this first the cart challenge, and then the above the air challenge with the monkey bars. And in this heat, there was actually a blonde woman who was really strong, and or maybe she was in the first heat. It's actually pretty hard to keep track of, but there was a blonde woman who was better than even Andre Jean said, that this woman was better at lifting and pushing these heavy carts than he was. So that was very impressive. She was really the one woman who stood a chance in these type of heavyweight physical competitions. So that was a little bit interesting to watch. And then in the second heat of three, you had the Dong Young Kim, the prestigious MMA fighter, and then you also had another MMA fighter, a guy who went by the nickname of the Korean Falcon. He was on another team along with an American actor named Justin Harvey. Well, he wasn't American. Actually, I believe he was South African, but with the name Justin Harvey on a show like Physical 100 where everyone is Korean, he basically gets looked at as American just for not being Korean. So you had a guy named Justin Harvey who looks as American as they come. He kind of looked like a cross between Bryce Harper and I had one other guy who I really thought, and CM Punk, a cross between Harper and Punk. And this guy was very strong, very good. So you had virtually the same type of thing where it was like you had a weaker team try to go in, you had you had a team try to do it in one shot. If you're able to do it in one shot or in 2 trips, then you were good. If it ended up taking you several trips, then you were not good. And Dong Young Kim made a big mistake where he was like, hey, I think we can do multiple trips at one point. And he realized that when he instructed one of his team members to do several lighter trips, that they stood no chance. And there was a guy named Gibson for one of the teams who was just unreal. He pushed 45 of those sandbags, which was like ridiculously close to 2 tons of weight on this cart. And that guy just did something that was virtually, didn't seem like it was even possible. Even the bodybuilding Thanos, I believe, only pushed 30 bags. And then this guy Gibson was a machine. He had this dad strength, an older guy, probably in his 40s, who managed to push 45 of those ridiculously heavy sandbags. So that guy definitely was the player of the day in that challenge. And then you had Dong Young Kim go, and he was able to pull his weight in part of his challenge, but then he had a teammate who was, as we discussed earlier, it was a case where you selected somebody for their strength, and he had a lot of debate. Dong Young Kim, the MMA fighter, had a lot of debate about who should I select? Should I select speed or strength? And for his last position on his team, he selected strength, and the guy nearly died trying to pull that thing, and Dong Young Kim had to basically force him to finish that challenge, and then the guy could not move. He was just strewn out all over the ground. And when you see how someone with no cardio gets absolutely exposed in just a really embarrassing way at this point in the competition, you kind of put into perspective where maybe you should just have an opening cardio challenge that gets rid of most of these guys who think that, oh yeah, I can just be an arm wrestling champion, or I could just be a guy who lifts weights at the gym and not do any cardio and somehow make it in a challenge called Physical 100. That cannot happen. And that's why I think that it would serve the show better to get rid of the players who have no stamina early on. Because I understand it's a show about all different physiques, and you want to see some of the crazy freaks who have just a body that you see they're 1 in a million in terms of their humongous, Bradley Martin type strength or Dwayne The Rock Johnson type strength. And that's kind of what you got with the bodybuilding Thanos. But then you have these other guys who are just really late weightlifters, or just very good at one specific thing like arm wrestling, and those guys are just not fit for these competitions. They didn't have the stamina to, once their legs were involved and you had to move your legs as well, they really stood no chance. So to me, doing an initial challenge like the treadmill and using that, and not just using it as a way to say, hey, these are the top 50, these are the bottom 50, and giving everyone a ranking, but actually using it as a way to eliminate the bottom 50, that would be somewhere in the direction that I think a season 3 should go, is get rid of anyone who literally can't run without passing out. And then also there's going to be people who can run and who are also freakishly strong. And those people just got to be good enough to place in the top 50%. And once you're in the top 50%, now you'll get to have different challenges that'll show off your brute strength, where you will now have the upper hand on some of the players who may have done better than you in just the pure running and the pure endurance. So I think things will even out over time, but you got to be able to at least run, and you got to be able to use your legs. So unfortunately, then we got to the air part of this, the monkey bar part of it, and we saw another back and forth where you had the Dong Young Kim team where the guy kept on falling in, and he didn't have what it took to go across the monkey bars. And you had then the other MMA fighter, the Korean Falcon. He fell in and really badly injured his leg, and he was on the Justin Harvey team, the very strong, well-rounded team. So when he fell, he badly hurt his leg, but he was able to get back up there and complete it in sort of a really heroic way of going out there and just powering through. And that's really what this show is about. It's about mustering the strength to go on when you really don't think that there should be any way to go on anymore. And you find that last bit of strength, and you do one more squat, and you do one more run across the monkey bars, and you do one more push with the cart. That's really the point of the show. It's mustering up that final bit of strength, and it's certainly a theme that would hit when we eventually got to the finale. But basically what you had here is the Dong Young Kim team got eliminated, and everybody got to make one more impassioned speech about how great the show was and how enjoyable it was. And in the case of the professor, Mr. Ipan, he was saying how he tried his best and He was very proud to participate with such a team who listened to him and put their faith in his hands. And he was just sorry that they couldn't make it all the way. And you had Dong Young Kim say that he's going to swing the hammer and destroy this torso, and he's going to get rid of this body and shred it and try to move back to the body that he had when he was the stun gun and his glory days in the UFC. And he's going to try to make one more push and become sort of a new man. And that was the way that it felt. It felt like you had these bodies represented by these statues, which were going to be destroyed, but you're going to have to swing and destroy yourself. And now it's time to rebuild and come back as an even stronger version of you. And that's really the theme of Physical 100. It's pushing beyond the limits and becoming the best version of yourself. And like we saw from Byung-suk was the firefighter who played in Season 1 and got eliminated in the death match where he just fought a guy who was way too big for him. And then he came back and literally trained so hard that he won the run. He placed one out of 100 people in the run and got to select his team. And he was really a Superman type character, the way that he looked. And then he gets there and he does the monkey bars and he does okay on his first round. And in his second round, he even improves on it. And it was just a full representation of this, that you can push yourself further than you ever thought possible. And we get to hit this point where now there's only 5 teams of 5 left. You have the Superman team, the Avengers team, you have the Andre Jean team, you have the Justin Harvey team, along with the Korean Falcon, and then there was a 4th team left. And now you had a very polarizing challenge where you had a cart pull. It was sort of a relay race where your entire team would go in one shot. So you had the 5 teammates, and you would all have to run from one side of a track to the other side of the track. You would stay in your lane, and you would grab these 2 harnesses, and you would put one over each shoulder, and then you would pull it like a sled. And this thing was it was sort of like a rolling pin that was very heavy, and you had to pull it, and the track wasn't totally straight. It was hilly, and there was actually a part with water. So you would have to haul this, pulling like a sled, going up and down, and you would have to pull one of these rolling pins to the other side, then run back, load up another one, and then pull that back, and then run back and touch back to the other side. So it was a run one way, back with the sled, run the other way, back with the sled, and then run back one more time without anything. So several heats of this, and what happened was in each round, one of your teammates would come in last place, and that person would be eliminated, and then you would immediately have to do it again. So it was 5 heats back to back to back to back to back to back. And by the time you got up to the final 2 people remaining, everyone was so exhausted, and you saw people's legs going out. There was a very popular actor who was on this show who I think people really liked for his looks, and all the women seemed to really go crazy for him because he had the cool hair and all that. And he made it pretty far, but ultimately he was on the Justin Harvey team, and Justin eliminated him. And after all this, you had Justin Harvey make it. You had Andre Jean make it. You didn't even have the bodybuilding Thanos make it. You had Amoti, who made it from his team. And I don't remember who was the 4th guy. There was a 4th guy on the Physical 100 side. It was a Bumsock. So you had the firefighter who got eliminated early in Season 1 and came back like a force to be reckoned with in Season 2. You had Justin Harvey, the actor who was from South Africa. You had Andre Jean, who was partially Korean, partially something else. I believe his mother was Korean and his father was not. Something like that. The rugby player. And you had Amoti, the CrossFitter, the sort of the wonder kid, the really amazing, just all-around athlete. And you had these 4 guys go to face off in the finale. And for the first round of the finale, what you had was the same challenge that you had in the previous season, where the players had the opportunity to come back into the game by holding up their torso on a rope. You had that right here. And between these 4 guys, it was a really, really tough mental showdown where you don't know when anyone's going to drop. And unfortunately here, it was Justin Harvey who didn't have what it took He was probably the weakest of the three guys still left in the competition at this point, and it was proportionate to your body weight, so there's really no excuses. Justin gave it a really good shot. It seemed like the challenge went on for quite a while until Justin finally dropped. Then we went down to 3, and this was probably the most brutal of all of the challenges in the entire show. It was just infinite squats, where you had coal being filled up into these buckets. And then anyone who's done a squat knows just how difficult it is to squat with weight, where you have it on your shoulders, and as the buckets keep as the coal keeps filling up your weight heavier and heavier and heavier, it just became brutally, brutally hard. And you had two smaller guys with shorter legs going against Andre Jean, who had longer legs. And as the bigger man, that meant he had a further distance to squat. And he pushed through several rounds of sheer torture before he finally could not get up that heavy load, whereas the other guys had a little bit more left in their legs. And then you got to the eventual finale of Byum-sak, the smaller athlete, against Amoti, the naturally more gifted athlete. Byum-sak, a front runner from the beginning. Amoti also a front runner, but he got eliminated at one point early on and then got resurrected. So there's definitely a case to be made that Byum-sak is the rightful winner and Amoti shouldn't really be there. But hey, that's the way the rules went, and Amoti is certainly a good ambassador for the show. And what you had was just a mano a mano. You had a pole in the ground, and then you had the two guys who had to push. And when one guy pushed from his side, he was trying to push the other guy back. Sort of a take on tug of war, where you have this turny mechanism, and when you push on your side, you're trying to push the other guy so that it goes 180 degrees in your direction, and he's trying to push this like spindle 180 degrees in his direction. And when you pushed it that 180 degrees, you would knock over a pole, and that pole made a ding, and then that signified the victory for you. Byum-sak, the smaller guy, was relentless, and he actually emerged victorious in the first round. It was a best of 3, but it was kind of surprising because Amoti was the bigger man, and this was a competition where the bigger man had a very, very strong advantage because this is really a show of strength and endurance as well, but both of these athletes had the endurance component down pat, so it came down to the strength. And where season 1, the final challenge was a continuous rope pull between two guys, which really showed strength combined with endurance, this one was really more strength than endurance, because if you had the strength to overcome, you could end it very quickly. And Amoti couldn't really get the best of Byum-sak, who had just an incredible iron will in round 1, but in rounds 2 and 3, Amoti realized how to push the bar to take the leverage, and once Amoti cracked the code, he was able to run Byum-sak out of the building, and it made for a very exciting come-from-behind victory for Amoti, and he won the 300 million won, and Byum-sak, unfortunately, had a very, very tough defeat, and it's probably one that's going to haunt him for the rest of his life, making it as a returning contestant from season 1, where he got eliminated in the first round of eliminations in the death matches, comes back, places first in the treadmill run, makes it all the way as a team leader, never gets eliminated, leads his team to victory after victory, beats his entire team as a smaller man, makes it to the final 4, outlasts Justin Harvey, then does the infinite squats as a guy who said that he really didn't train squats. And he goes toe-to-toe with Amoti, wins round 1, and then loses round 2, and loses round 3 for a really brutal, brutal loss. Now, comparing season 1 to season 2, I would say that season 1 was better. In my opinion, in season 1, where they did a challenge where instead of having, when you hit the point where there were 30 people left, instead of having all of the teams compete against each other, they had 2 teams link up to form a group of 10, another 2 link up to form a second group of 10, and then the final 2 teams link up to form a third group of 10. And they had these 3 groups of 10. They had to transport a massive ship. And this was the best part of the entire show. It was, can these 10 people work together to transport this extremely heavy load? And you got this taste of the sum of the parts and the teamwork. If you really work together, you can accomplish greater things than you ever thought. And there was the team led by Sexyama from the first season, where They were not the strongest team. They were probably the weakest team, but they managed to complete it in the quickest time because they worked together the best. And that was a really wholesome, incredible moment when they finally pushed that pirate ship quick enough and beat the other two teams, achieving an incredible first place victory over the stronger teams. And I think losing that challenge and turning it into more of a every man for himself delicate challenge wasn't quite as rewarding as the challenge in season 2. Also, season 2 had the negative effects of the maze challenge, where it was very hard to tell what was happening. People were bringing cargo to 3 different locations, and you didn't really know the teams too well. So that was another knock on season 2. Also on season 1, the hanging challenge at the beginning left a little bit to be desired. So the treadmill, I would say, was a step up. But altogether, season 1, I would say, was altogether better than season 2. Also, season 2 had sort of a problem where all the women just got brutally annihilated in the cargo pull challenge, where you were pulling the rolling wheel, and also all of the small guys. It was really, at that point, it was you needed to be a certain size in order to win. Whereas I really appreciated what they did in season 1, which was when you got all the way up to the end, you still had your team intact, and you had sort of an Atlas challenge, you had a Sisyphus challenge, you had all these challenges where you needed to split your team into 5 and say, hey, I think we can win all of these categories. You go do this challenge, you do this challenge, you do this challenge. So instead of facing off against your own team, you were facing off with one member of your team going against one member of each of the other 4 teams, or each of the other 5 teams. I don't remember exactly how it was, all the way there at the end. So what you were trying to do was figure out how to get as many of your people to play in a challenge that suited them and win. And you saw some people take the fall on their sword and face off in a challenge that they knew they couldn't really win, so that some of their teammates could maybe have a chance of winning. And that was another really incredible, wholesome moment about season 1 that you didn't quite get in season 2, where it was sort of just kamikaze, where most of the team leaders, who were the strongest members of their team, just got to eat the rest of their team alive in rapid succession, just going 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and the team leader eliminated. Only Justin Harvey was, I believe, a non-team leader who was able to. I think Justin Harvey and maybe there was one other guy who was able to. Amoti and Justin Harvey were able to defeat the rest of their team, even though they weren't the team leaders. But what really was, in my opinion, something lacking from season 2 compared to season 1. But I think if you come back with a season 3, and you can sort of incorporate the best parts of season 1 and the best parts of season 2 together and figure out a way to give the women a bit more of a chance, I think that you can come back with a 3rd season that can top not just the 1st season, not just the 2nd season, but both. And that's really exciting. It's a very wholesome show. It's a show about sportsmanship. It's a show about overcoming the odds and about working to become the best version of yourself. This is the Straight Up Fight Network.